I am the editor of the Papers of Andrew Jackson, and Papers of Andrew Jackson is a project to collect and publish all of Jackson's extant literary record, everything that he wrote and everything that was written to him. So we deal at my shop with primary sources, primary documents. That's what we live by. And as the editor, and even before I was the editor, all the way going back to when I was a graduate student, I immersed myself in primary sources, and that means that Readex and I have had a very beneficial relationship for me, going back decades, back to the days of microprint and the old machines. And we use Readex databases every day, literally. The early American newspapers, there's a great new territorial papers database that I'm sure we're going to buy as soon as it comes out. If you want you and your students and your colleagues to have the opportunity to use primary sources, Readex has a bountiful assortment of them. Digital databases such as newspapers now enable us to find things that we never would have been able to find before. And with certain search techniques and with a good newspaper database, you can call those up in a matter of seconds. Before that, it would have been literally impossible to find them. We try to track down every Andrew Jackson letter that is extant. And in the 19th century, particularly, letters were often published as kind of curiosities. The way historical items of interest got published was that someone had them in the attic and took them over to the local newspaper editor, and they'd run them as what today we would call a feature story. And we knew those were out there. The problem is how to find them, because they could show up anywhere, anytime. In this case, this was an example of not digital resources enabling something to be done faster and easier, but enabling something that never could have been done before. So we were curious to find Andrew Jackson letters wherever they might be in newspapers. Question is how you screen down, because if you look for Andrew Jackson, you're going to come up with millions of hits. And we hit upon the idea of looking for the word combination servant Andrew Jackson using search functions, because servant is the last word of the customary closing at the time. Your most humble and obedient servant, or something like that. So if you printed an Andrew Jackson letter and you printed it faithfully, the last three words in it were likely to be servant Andrew Jackson. We ran that combination through databases and came up with an excellent Andrew Jackson letter on nullification, which was written to a friend of his in Tennessee and then published in 1863, 30 years after it was written, where we never would have found it. And we found these letters from Jackson to one of his Tennessee buddies that were published in a Vicksburg, Mississippi newspaper in the 1880s, where you might say they had no reason for being and where we otherwise never would have found them. With the primary sources at our command, we can answer questions that we never would have been able to answer. We're very interested in the territorial papers set. As historians well know, a historian named Clarence Carter years ago published a series called The Territorial Papers of the United States, which we use all the time. In Jackson's presidency, in particular, the Arkansas volumes, Arkansas Territory, and Florida Territory, and Michigan Territory. But there are a lot of papers in the National Archives in Washington that didn't make it into Carter's small sample. And often the solution to a particular mystery or problem can be found in what you might say are second or third level documents. For instance, Jackson had a running controversy over territorial judges in both Florida and Michigan. There were some of them to whom he took a rather violent opposition. He nominated their replacements. Their replacements got rejected by the Senate. And this is something we haven't been able to figure out what's behind it all, what's going on beneath the surface, what the scaffolding is. And it's quite possible the answer lies in territorial papers.